I was already halfway up the hill road when I saw the church. A few miles outside, Hazard, Kentucky, St. Brigid's Hill Church sat above the trees on a shelf of dark ground, all old stone and black windows, with one hard white floodlight burning in the gravel lot below it. The road up to it was narrow and washed out along the edges, the kind of road that made your tires crack loose gravel down the slope if you got lazy with the wheel. It had rained earlier, and the wet dirt along the shoulder gave off that cold clay smell you get in the hills after dark. My headlights kept catching the stone wall that ran along one side of the road, then slipping off into brush and tree trunks and nothing else. It was a bad place to pick up freight. That was my first real thought when the church came fully into view. Not creepy, not haunted, just wrong for the job. If somebody told me I was hauling machinery out of a county yard, or generators from a school site, or even old pews out of a church getting torn down, fine. I'd done stranger work than that. But this place didn't look like a building being cleaned out. It looked like something had already ended there a while ago, and nobody had felt like saying it out loud. I eased my pickup into the lot and saw the Stonemark trailer backed in near the front steps, straight and clean and centered under the work light. Enclosed 53-foot trailer, white sides, no extra markings besides the company name on the tractor door. Not a flatbed, not a local box truck, a full road rig. There was a small crane truck parked off to one side with its outriggers down in the gravel, and the whole setup looked expensive in a way church property usually doesn't. Temporary light tower, heavy rigging, shock pallets, chain laid out in neat loops instead of kicked into a pile. Nobody was talking unless they needed to. That bothered me too. Most loadouts have some kind of noise around them. Somebody bitching about timing, somebody asking for a wrench, somebody repeating the same instruction because one guy wasn't listening the first time. Here it was just diesel idle, the click of cooling metal, and the soft grind of boots in wet gravel. I shut off my pickup and sat there a second with both hands still on the wheel. Through the windshield, I could see one man near the light with a clipboard and a dark jacket zipped up to the throat. Another was crouched by a stack of rigging gear, checking chain tension with both hands like he cared what happened if one link failed. I took them in the way drivers do. Who's actually working? Who's just standing where the work is happening? Who's going to be a problem before sunrise? The man with the clipboard looked like office, but not soft office. Mid-40s maybe. Lean build, controlled, dry face. The kind of man who never wastes words because he thinks that makes other people sloppy. The one by the rigging looked older and heavier through the shoulders, with a work jacket that had gone stiff from weather and grease over the years. He moved like he knew what heavy freight could do if it shifted half an inch at the wrong time. I got out, and the cold hit sharper than I expected. Not winter cold, just that damp hill cold that finds the gap at your collar right away. The man with the clipboard looked at me once and said, "John Vann?" "Yeah," I said. "You made good time," he said. That told me he was Edwin Graves before he bothered introducing himself. He held my eyes maybe half a second, then glanced toward the trailer. "We're loading tonight. You drive straight through." I looked past him toward the open trailer doors. "What exactly am I hauling?" I asked. He kept his face flat. "A church bell." I waited, because that answer didn't come close to covering it. Edwin didn't fill the space. He just tucked the clipboard under one arm like the conversation had already reached its natural end. "That's enough for tonight," he said. That was answer enough. I walked the lot while they kept working, mostly because I like seeing a place before I leave it behind. The front doors of the church were shut and strapped over with steel bars that hadn't been there when the building was built. That much was obvious. You could tell by the color difference in the stone around the mounts. Above that, the bell tower was dark. No glow from inside, no stained glass spill, no sign anybody used the place for worship anymore. Off to the side, one narrow service door stood cracked open maybe 6 inches, and once or twice I got the feeling somebody was behind it watching the trailer. I never saw a face, Just that feeling you get when your eyes keep going back to the same dark opening. This did not feel like a church helping move one of its own things. It felt like a place giving something up because it had to. The man by the rigging straightened, braced one hand on the steel frame, and said, "Back her in slow." That was Kurt Naylor. He didn't say his name. I got it later. At that moment, he was just the guy who looked like he belonged there more than anyone else and liked it the least. The load came out in pieces. First the transport frame, already assembled and waiting on rollers. Thick steel, gusseted corners, shock mounts bolted into a reinforced cradle. Then the suspended weight under padded containment panels and strapped coverings. I never got a clean, full look at it, not then. But I saw enough. Tall, rounded, bell-shaped under the wrap, no question. Bigger than I'd pictured when Edwin said church bell, and heavier by a long shot. This wasn't some decorative brass thing from a chapel foyer. This was tower weight, old metal, serious mass. Kurt checked the chain tension again while the crane took the strain. Two other men I hadn't seen step out of the shadows guided the frame slow and steady toward the trailer. Nobody rushed, nobody cursed. Every hand movement looked practiced. When the load crossed the trailer threshold, the whole rig gave a hard, settling shift that I felt through my boots even standing 10 feet away. I checked my phone while they locked it down. One missed voicemail from Dr. Peter Weller. I stared at the name for a second, thumb resting over the screen, then locked the phone and put it back in my pocket. I already knew it was about my father. I already knew it wasn't going to make this night lighter. There wasn't a version of that message that did. Inside the trailer, Kurt and the others were securing the frame. Chain ratchets, lock points, final bracing. The rear doors were still open. The work light hit the inside walls and died there, leaving the cargo itself half swallowed in shadow and padding and steel. Then I heard it. Not a full strike. Not enough to call it ringing. Just a small rounded note from somewhere inside the insulated frame. Too clean to be chain noise, too shaped to be accidental. I looked up right away. Nobody else did. That bothered me more than if they had. Edwin handed me the route packet on a clipboard that still felt damp from the air. It was thinner than it should have been for a load that heavy. Pickup site, destination, route window, seal number, fuel instructions, one emergency contact. That was it. St. Brigid's Hill Church listed as the point of origin. Mercy Ridge Preservation. Annex listed as the drop outside Bluefield, West Virginia. There was no real cargo description beyond one dry line that said, protected ecclesiastical material. No dimensions beyond the trailer load profile, no value declaration, no restoration notes, no handling language you'd normally see if somebody actually cared about an antique in the usual way. I flipped the page over to make sure I hadn't missed something. Nothing on the back. Edwin watched me do it and said, "The route matters. The rules matter more." "You tell all your drivers that?" I asked. "Not all of them," he said. That sat with me a little wrong, but not wrong enough to walk. I tucked the paperwork into the cab and started my pre-trip. I always do it the same way, same order, same rhythm. Left front first, tires, tread, valve stems, lug pattern, visible wear. Then lights, then airlines. Then I walk the length of the trailer and look at what the job would rather I didn't miss. Hinges, latch rods, cross members, mud flaps, suspension, anything wet that shouldn't be wet, anything loose that ought to be tight. I've been doing it long enough that I don't think much while I'm doing it. My hands move, my eyes catch what they catch. That's how you stay alive and keep your commercial driver's license. The truck itself was clean, not new, but maintained. Stonemark wasn't running junk. The trailer doors were heavier than standard, insulated inside, with extra reinforcement around the lock bars. I checked the seal number against the paperwork before they closed it fully. Matched exactly. When I got to the rear tandem and stepped back to take in the trailer ride height, that was where I felt the load differently. Heavy freight always settles a trailer, but this sat with a kind of centered pull to it, not just weight, control. Like whatever was inside had been measured down to the inch and suspended exactly where they wanted it. No sloppy rear bias, no uneven lean. It rode like a piece of industrial equipment or a machine part with a bad consequence if it shifted. Kurt came around from the far side with a flashlight in one hand and checked the latch again without looking at me. He checked the latch again without looking at me. "Pull out slow," he said. That was about as much personality as he'd shown all night. I climbed into the cab, shut the door, and finally played Dr. Weller's voicemail. His voice came through clear and level, hospital quiet in the background. "John, this is Dr. Peter Weller. Your father's stable for now, but he's still in critical care and he's not out of this yet. Call me when you can." That was exactly how I wanted it said. No soft landing, no fake reassurance. Stable for now, not out of this yet. I could work with that because it meant there were still facts left to hold on to. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat there with the cab light on and the engine off. My father had always talked like Dr. Weller if he thought something mattered. Short, plain, a little harder than it needed to be on the surface, better than false comfort. I was tightening my gloves when I remembered him standing in my apartment parking lot 3 winters back, looking at my front tire after I'd called him mad about the way the truck was pulling in sleet. He'd crouched there in the cold with one hand on the sidewall and said, "Check your tires before you blame the road." That was him all over. No sympathy first, no easing into it. Just the thing you needed to hear whether you liked it or not. Then he'd gone back to his own truck, driven to a parts store, and come back with a gauge I still kept in my door pocket. I called Dr. Weller before I fired the engine. He answered on the 3rd ring. "John." "Yeah," I said, "I got your message." I could hear paper moving on his end, then a door shut somewhere behind him. "Your father's stable for now," he told me. "For now?" I asked. He took a second before answering. "He's not out of this yet." I looked through the windshield at the church steps under the floodlight. "Is he awake?" "Off and on," he said. "Not enough to rely on. We're watching the swelling. We're watching his blood pressure. He's still in a place where this could turn." I didn't answer right away. "If he holds where he is," Dr. Weller said, "there'll be decisions coming fast after that, meaning surgery, rehab, transfer, money. He didn't have to spell it out. Men like him get tired of hearing themselves say the same ugly numbers." "How much time do I have?" I asked. "Not much," he said. That was what bothered me, not the words, the accuracy of them. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there for another few seconds with my hand on the key. Franklin would have hated every part of this, hated the ICU bed, hated the idea of bills stacking up while people spoke around him in softened voices, hated me spending money on him most of all. He was the kind of man who'd rather limp on a bad hip for 6 months than admit a doctor was right the first time. I knew what I had in savings. I knew what I didn't. There wasn't some hidden account I'd forgotten about. There wasn't family money coming out of the walls. There was what I had, what insurance might cover, and everything left after that. Franklin would have told me not to go under for him. He would have meant it. That didn't change the math. It just made it uglier. The job didn't need to feel safe. It needed to feel real enough to pay. I started the engine, listened to it settle, and checked the mirrors again. Edwin stepped up to the door once I had the window down. He tapped the route packet with one finger. "Stay on schedule," he said. "Do not improvise." I looked at the top sheet again. "Why is it called a preservation annex?" He kept his eyes on me. "Because that's what it is." I waited, but he didn't offer anything else. "Preserving what?" I asked. He took a breath through his nose, not irritated, not friendly. "Material that isn't kept in public circulation." That meant nothing and somehow managed to sound official anyway. I looked past him toward the church. "That's supposed to make me feel better?" "No," he said. That was answer enough. I put the truck in gear and eased it out of the gravel lot. The trailer came with me smooth and heavy, no sway, no lag, just that deep-loaded resistance through the frame that told me everything behind me had real mass to it. In the left mirror, I caught the church one last time, the tower standing black against the darker ridge behind it, no light in the bell opening, no movement at the cracked side door, just that dead shape on the hill like it had already finished with the place and was waiting to be finished with the rest of us too. I turned down the road and let the truck pick up slow. Just make the run. That was all it had to be. A route, a night, a paycheck, a hospital bill cut down to something I could survive. But even before I hit the bottom of the hill, I could feel the trailer behind me in a way that had nothing to do with weight alone. It was too centered, too quiet, like the load wasn't just secured back there, like it was settled in. Before I fully cleared the church property, I saw Kurt step into the wash of my headlights and lift one hand. I eased off the throttle and let the truck roll slow instead of stopping hard. Gravel popped under the steer tires. The trailer stayed straight behind me, heavy and steady. Kurt came up on the driver's side with his collar turned up against the damp and slapped the door once with the back of his hand. I dropped the window. He held up a laminated card about the size of a motel key envelope. "Read it now," he said. I took it from him and looked down at it in the dash light. The laminate was already scuffed in places like it had been handled more than a few times. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that the print was plain. No logo, no legal language, no company header, just 5 numbered lines in black block text. I read the first one once, then the whole card through. Do not let the trailer come to a full stop within sight of any church steeple. If you hear a bell ring from inside the trailer before midnight, keep driving. If you hear it after midnight, do not count the rings. Keep the radio on at all times. If the radio turns to choir music, raise the volume and do not change the station until the song ends. If you see anyone standing on the shoulder with both hands over their ears, do not look at their face. If the bell rings in a voice you recognize, do not answer it and do not say that person's name out loud. I read them again slower. On the page, they looked insane. Out loud, they would have sounded worse. But there was something about the way they were written that kept them from feeling like a joke. No flourish, no explanation, no attempt to sell me on them, just flat instructions, like somebody had learned the hard way what needed to be said and cut out everything else. I looked back out the window at Kurt. "This for real?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. Rainwater was still dripping off the brim of his cap. He didn't look irritated. He didn't look amused either. He looked like a man who had handed out that card before and had gotten tired of the same questions a long time ago. I tapped the card with one finger. "What happens if I miss one?" I asked. He didn't look at me when he answered. "Don't." That was what bothered me. If he'd grinned, if he'd tried to scare me, if he'd said something stupid about bad luck or cursed roads, I could have filed it away with the rest of the nonsense people attached to nighttime jobs. But Kurt said it the way a dockman tells you not to stand under a suspended load. Not dramatic, not mystical, just practical and final. I looked back down at the card. Rule 4 sat there uglier than the others somehow. Maybe because it painted a picture too fast. Maybe because it sounded like the kind of thing no one would think to invent unless they had already seen it. Behind Kurt, in the half-dark by the church, the side service door opened a little wider. A man stood there in a black shirt and collar, one hand still on the frame, the light from inside the building cutting around one shoulder and leaving the rest of him in shadow. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't stride out into the lot or raise his voice or make a show of interrupting. He just stood there like a man who'd been standing there a while already and had finally decided the moment had come to speak. "That bell was never meant to travel after dark," he said. Kurt didn't turn around. Edwin did, but only with his eyes. He was still near the trailer, checking something on the clipboard under the floodlight like the words hadn't changed his evening at all. I looked toward the doorway. The priest was older, maybe late 60s, narrow through the chest, the kind of face age had sharpened instead of softened. Tired eyes, gray at the temples, not shaky, not theatrical, just tired in a way that looked earned. Edwin said nothing, I said. Then why move it now? The priest looked past me toward the trailer. Because they always wait until they need something. He said it half like an answer, half like a complaint he was done repeating. He didn't explain who they were. He didn't have to. Between him standing in that doorway and Edwin pretending the line hadn't landed, I got the feeling that argument had already happened before I ever turned onto the hill road. I looked back at the card in my hand. "This all from you?" I asked him. He took a second before answering. "Some of it." That was not a useful answer, but it was honest in a way Edwin's answers weren't. Edwin finally stepped away from the trailer and came over, hands bare, expression unchanged. "The route matters," he said. "The rules matter more." I looked at him over the top edge of the card. "You people planning on explaining any of this?" "No," he said. That was answer enough. I should have walked then. Maybe that's the version of the story a smarter man tells. I saw the card. I heard the priest. I got back in my pickup and went home. But there are versions of your life that only exist if you've got money to choose them. I didn't have that kind of money. What I had was a father in critical care and a number in my head that wasn't getting smaller while I stood in a church lot arguing with strangers. So I read the card a third time. Rule 1 I could translate into road behavior even if it made no sense. Don't stop where you can see a steeple. Fine. Rule 2 sounded like something written by a drunk or a lunatic, until I remembered the little rounded note I'd already heard from inside the trailer. Rule 3 was pure nonsense on the face of it, which somehow made it feel worse. Rule 4. I didn't like it all. Rule 5 was the one that stayed in my hand like a weight. If the bell rings in a voice you recognize, not if it sounds like a voice, not if it sounds human, in a voice you recognize. The priest stepped one pace farther into the doorway light. If it says a name you love, keep your mouth shut. Nobody said anything for a second after that. Even Kurt turned his head a little then, just enough to let me know he'd heard it too. I looked at Father Gideon March, though I didn't know his name yet. "You expect me to believe that?" He kept his eyes on the church steps when he answered. "No," he said. "I expect you to remember it." That landed harder than I wanted it to. Edwin took the card lightly between two fingers and tapped Rule 2 once, then gave it back. "You've got your route, you've got your instructions. Deliver the load without deviation." There it was. That line I understood. I'd heard versions of it in yards, depots, cold storage docks, hazmat briefings, and livestock transfers. Don't freelance, don't get curious, don't decide you know better once you're alone with the load. That part of the job made sense to me. Maybe that was what Stonemark was counting on. Dress the madness in just enough familiar language, and a working man will carry it farther than he should. I slid the card into the inside pocket of my jacket. Kurt stepped back from the door. "Read it again once you're on the road," he said. "You got anything else cheerful for me?" I asked. "No," he said. I rolled the window up and let the truck idle a second longer than I needed to. In the left mirror, Father Gideon was still in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the church dark behind him. Edwin was already turning away, walking back toward the light and the empty equipment like the handoff was done, and whatever came next didn't belong to the lot anymore. I pulled out slow, let the truck take the slope, and felt the trailer settle behind me. At the bottom of the hill, I checked the mirror one more time. The priest was still there. Edwin wasn't looking anymore. That told me more than either one of them had. Once I got off the hill and out onto the back roads east of Hazard, the drive started to look like something I knew. 2-lane blacktop, wet shine in the headlights, trees packed in close enough that the road felt cut through them instead of built there. Long bends, short rises, patched sections where the county had fixed what it could and left the rest alone. The shoulders were mostly useless. Gravel in some places, mud in others. Nothing you wanted to trust with a loaded trailer after dark. I'd run mountain roads before. Not these exact ones, not with this load, but the shape of the work was familiar. Keep your speed honest. Don't let the downhills talk you into laziness. Watch the edge line. Watch the crown. Listen to the truck more than you listen to your own nerves. That helped. For the first 20 minutes or so, I could almost make the night fit into a normal frame. The trailer sat heavy and centered behind me. No sway, no pull. The steering felt right. The rain had backed off to a fine mist that only showed up when the high beams caught it. Every now and then I'd pass a mailbox leaning toward the road or a porch light set way back in the trees, but mostly it was just black hillside and my own headlights working ahead of me. I kept thinking about the card in my jacket pocket, but thinking isn't the same as believing. Not yet. The local station held for a while. Some late-night talk, a weather update, 2 old country songs with too much reverb on the vocals. Then, the signal started doing what mountain signals do. First, a little hiss under the voices. Then, the words pulling thin and drifting to one side of the speaker. I reached for the knob without really thinking about it and gave it a slow turn. Static washed in, then out, then back again. I turned the dial a little farther. Before I could land on another station, the static cleared all at once. No call letters, no DJ, no ad break, just a choir already singing, like I'd dropped into the middle of something that had been going on before I got there. My hand stayed on the knob. The voices sounded old. Not old as in worn-out tape, old as in the room around them didn't sound modern. Too much air in it, too much stone. I've heard plenty of church music on the radio over the years, usually around Christmas or Easter if you're driving through the right town. This didn't sound like that. It sounded like it had been recorded in a place built to hold sound long after people were gone from it. I thought of Rule 3. Keep the radio on at all times. If the radio turns to choir music, raise the volume and do not change the station until the song ends. I actually felt embarrassed sitting there with my fingers on the dial. Then I raised the volume. It made me feel stupid, which was probably why I did it. Pride gets drivers hurt in smaller ways than that every day. Maybe Stonemark hired men who liked to laugh at company nonsense. Maybe this was some test of whether I'd follow instructions that sounded dumb. I could live with feeling dumb. I had bills. My father was in critical care. There are worse things than looking ridiculous alone in a truck cab at night. So I let the hymn play. The road dipped and turned. The beam pattern slid over wet rock and tree trunks, and the occasional reflective marker nailed too low on a post. The choir stayed steady in the speakers, not crackling, not fading, not shifting like a weak signal ought to shift out there. A woman's voice came through higher than the others for a few bars, then sank back into the rest. I didn't know the song. I wasn't sure I wanted to. A few miles later, the first real problem showed up. I came around a downhill curve and saw brake lights ahead of me, 3 vehicles strung out on the grade, all going slower than they should have been. At the same time, up on the ridge to my right through the fog, I caught the shape of a church steeple. Small one. White or pale gray, hard to tell in that light, but a steeple all the same. It stood above the tree line just enough to be seen. Rule 1 came back to me fast. Do not let the trailer come to a full stop within sight of any church steeple. I eased off, feathered the brakes, and let the truck settle back on its suspension without bringing it to a full stop. The line of vehicles ahead crawled, pickup in front, then an SUV, then something smaller I couldn't make out yet. No room to go around, no shoulder worth using. I kept the rig moving at that ugly half roll where your foot is working both pedals and your left leg starts to tighten because the whole truck wants a simpler answer than the one you're giving it. The pickup ahead crept forward maybe 10 feet. I did the same, The steeple stayed there above the ridge. I watched the gap, watched the mirrors, watched the nose of the truck. The trailer stayed straight. I kept it rolling. Not clean driving, not pretty, but controlled enough. The kind of thing you do because the other option is planting 40,000 pounds of steel and cargo in exactly the wrong place. By the time traffic cleared and I got back on the throttle, the church was behind me. I didn't like how fast that first rule had stopped sounding absurd. The choir went on another minute or two, maybe less. Hard to say. Night driving stretches and compresses time if you let it. Then, the song cut off so clean, it felt less like a radio ending and more like somebody had shut a door. For 1 second, there was nothing but engine noise, tire hiss on wet pavement, and the light tick of moisture hitting the windshield. Then I heard it. One bell tone from inside the trailer. Not loud, not dramatic, just one clean, rounded note, full enough to carry shape and metal and space inside it. Not chain rattle, not frame shift, not a loose brace hitting steel. I know what loaded trailers sound like. I know the knocks and groans and occasional weird resonances freight can throw at you when the road gets bad. This wasn't any of those. I checked the dash clock. 11:37 p.m. Before midnight, keep driving, that was the rule. Simple enough, I kept driving. A part of me was already reaching for explanations before the sound had fully died. Suspension transfer, one of the inner support points settling after that slow roll under the steeple. Some kind of harmonic ring inside the containment frame. I'd hauled a generator skid once that sang on left-hand curves like somebody blowing across a bottle. Hauled steel coils that clicked under temperature changes. Hauled refrigeration units that made a hum at idle that got into your molars if you listened too long. Freight does strange things when you're alone with it at night. That doesn't make it supernatural. It makes it freight. That was what I told myself, and it might have held if not for the card. The card was the problem, not the sound by itself. The fact that somebody had handed me a laminated list in a church parking lot and one of those lines had reached forward into the night and named the exact thing I'd just heard. That changed it. Changed the weight of it. I kept my hands where they belonged and watched the road unwind ahead of me. No one in the other lane, no houses for a stretch, just dark trees and the pale ribbon of center line lifting and dropping through the hills. I didn't turn the radio. I didn't pull over. I didn't get dramatic with it. I just kept going because the rule told me to keep going. And that bothered me more than the bell itself. By the time I crossed into the next long stretch of mountain road, the sound had already settled somewhere in the back of my head, with the route and the church and Father Gideon standing in that doorway. It felt less like I was hauling something from one place to another, and more like I'd stepped into the middle of something that had already happened before. The road was still manageable. The truck was still running clean. The trailer was still steady behind me. But now I was listening for it. The farther east I got, the less the road felt like part of a state, and the more it felt like its own separate thing. The lanes narrowed by inches at a time, until I started noticing it in my shoulders. Tree lines pressed in closer. Rock walls rose up on one side and fell away on the other. The reflectors along the edge got farther apart. Houses thinned out until the rare porch light looked less like a sign of life and more like something left behind. Even the few gas stations I passed sat dark and closed, their signs unlit. Their lots empty except for one pickup here and there under a weak security lamp. Inside the cab, everything started feeling more defined. The hum under the floor, the tug of the seatbelt across my chest on downhill grades, the smell of damp canvas from my jacket hanging behind me, the fan pushing low, warm air across my knees, the mirrors holding the same two hard black lanes, and the pale stripe of trailer edge over and over again. A truck is supposed to make you feel enclosed. That's part of the job. But this felt different. Less like I was moving through the mountains and more like the mountains had pulled tight around the truck and left me one lane to stay in. The bell sounded again at 11:44 p.m., just once. It came up from behind me clean and round, same as before, not loud enough to rattle anything in the cab, just enough to land where my attention already was. I looked at the clock first this time, not because I was scared yet, but because I wanted the rule to stay simple. Before midnight, keep driving. So I kept driving. I passed a weathered county sign half covered in vines and missed the town name because I was checking the clock again 3 minutes later. 11:47 p.m., then 11:53 p.m., then 11:58 p.m. I was watching the time more than I was watching the route markers, which should have annoyed me more than it did. Normally, I like to know exactly where I am. That night, I cared more about what the clock was doing than what county I was in. The next bell tone didn't come at any useful interval. Not 5 minutes later. Not 10. It came at 11:51 p.m., then nothing for long enough that I almost started to settle again, and then another one at 11:57 p.m. No pattern. No rhythm. That made it worse. If something repeats on a beat, your body adjusts to it. If it doesn't, you stay a little braced all the time. The first person I saw with both hands over their ears was standing just beyond a guardrail curve where the road bent around a drop. I caught the shape at the edge of my headlights and almost turned to take a better look on instinct. Human figure, dark clothing maybe, standing on the shoulder with elbows out and both hands clamped over the sides of the head, not waving, not trying to flag me down, not moving at all. Rule 4 hit me so fast it felt physical. If you see anyone standing on the shoulder with both hands over their ears, do not look at their face. I locked my eyes back on the center line so hard it made my neck muscles tighten. Just held the lane and drove through the space beside them without letting myself check twice. That part was harder than I want to admit. People are built to verify what they think they just saw, especially drivers. You scan, confirm, correct. That's the job. Seeing something on the shoulder and not checking it goes against every habit the road teaches you. But I didn't look. The truck passed the figure. Nothing hit the trailer. No shout. No movement in the mirror that I let myself study. I drove another mile, maybe 2, and told myself there were explanations. Someone drunk. Someone high. Someone in some kind of distress out in the cold. Appalachia's got enough lonely roads and bad decisions to fill 100 stories. It didn't have to mean anything bigger than that. Then I saw the second one. This one stood near a wire fence line with no driveway, no mailbox, no parked vehicle anywhere near him, too far from any house, too still. Hands over ears again. I kept my eyes on the road, another curve, another drop. The road pitched down hard, then rose. My hands were dry on the wheel, but I could feel my jaw setting. The third one showed up 10 minutes later on a slope that didn't make sense. Halfway up a bank where nobody would choose to stand, body angled wrong against the grade, hands over ears, head slightly dipped like he was listening to something inside his own skull. That was when the rules stopped feeling like superstition and started feeling like field instructions. I reached for the phone and called the number Edwin had given me. It rang long enough that I figured I'd get voicemail. Then he answered. "Yeah," he said. I kept my eyes on the road. I've seen people on the shoulder. Silence for half a second. Then, "Did you look at them?" Not what they looked like. Not where. Not how many. Not their faces, I said. "Then keep driving," he told me. That was what bothered me. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Who are they?" His voice stayed flat. "Not your problem if you keep moving." The line clicked dead before I could say anything else. I drove on with the phone still in my hand for a second, then dropped it back onto the passenger seat. Outside, the road looked the same as it had 20 minutes earlier. Wet blacktop, tree trunks, cut banks, occasional fence posts. But it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt annotated, like there were things on it I had not been meant to understand, only avoid. At 11:59 p.m., I came around another long bend and caught brake lights ahead. This time it was worse. A small roadside church sat down in a hollow off the right side of the road, maybe 50 yards back from the pavement. One security light over the entry, everything else dark. But the steeple stood above the tree line clear as day, pale and narrow in the mist. In front of me, traffic had stacked up behind what looked like a county utility truck crawling half over the center line with flashers on. I had a sedan ahead of me, another vehicle in front of that, and nowhere to put 40 feet of trailer and tractor except straight where I already was. I came off the throttle and started working the brakes gently, measuring every foot. Do not let the trailer come to a full stop within sight of any church steeple. The sedan ahead of me stopped dead. I didn't. I let the truck creep, not enough to bump the gap, just enough to keep motion in the drive line. Brake, release, idle, roll, brake again. I could feel the trailer weight pushing forward and settling back against me in tiny surges. My left calf was burning from holding that ugly half pressure where you're trying not to commit to either stopping or going. The church steeple stayed there off to the right the whole time, white through the mist, like it had been set there to see what I'd do. The sedan moved 6 feet. I took 4. The utility truck lurched ahead. I stayed on the wheel, on the mirrors, on the gap. I didn't give myself enough room to think about how ridiculous the whole maneuver would look to anybody standing outside. I just held the truck in that slow mechanical crawl until the line finally opened and I could ease back into the lane without ever letting the rig go fully still. When I passed the church lot, I looked straight ahead. My shirt was damp under the jacket by then. The road emptied out again after that. No cars, no taillights, just dark hills and wet pavement and the sound of my own engine climbing and easing through the grades. 11:59 p.m. dragged longer than any minute I can remember. I watched the clock click over in the lower corner of the dash. 12 a.m. Nothing happened right away. That made it worse. I drove another 30 seconds, maybe 40. Then the bell rang from inside the trailer. One tone. My brain started to count before I could stop it, not because I wanted to, because that's what a brain does. One sound, like that, lands and some part of you marks it automatically. I pushed the thought away so hard it almost made me dizzy. Look at the lane. Watch the shoulder. Check the mirrors. Don't count. The bell rang again. I felt the number try to form in my head and cut it off before it finished. That was the first time the rules stopped being about behavior and started getting inside the machinery of my mind. I didn't just have to not do something with my hands or my eyes. I had to stop myself from doing something my own head had already started. The road ahead had gone too quiet, not empty. Quiet. No animals in the brush, no distant dog barking from some hidden yard, just tires on wet pavement and the sense that the route itself had passed some marker I couldn't see. I left the radio on, watched the center line, and kept the truck in lane. Then the bell rang a third time after midnight, and I didn't count it, at least not all the way. That was enough to tell me what kind of road I was on now, not just a route with bad weather and weird locals and one load too many. A route with triggers. A route that had conditions built into it, the steeples, the shoulder figures, the clock, the music, the sound behind me. By then I understood one thing clearly. Whatever Stonemark had handed me in that church lot, it wasn't a warning about what might happen on the road. It was a list of things the road was already prepared to do. After midnight, not counting turned into work. That was the first real change. Before midnight, the rule had been simple enough. Hear it. Keep driving. After midnight, the bell stopped being just a sound behind me and started turning into something I had to manage inside my own head. My mind kept trying to put shape to it. That's what people do. We count things so they'll hold still. So every time the bell sounded, I had to cut the number off before it fully formed. The worst part was how quickly that urge spread. The turn signal, the wipers, the dull bump under the trailer on rough patches, everything wanted to become pattern once I knew pattern was dangerous. I kept both hands on the wheel and told myself the same thing every few minutes. Don't count. Just after 12:07 a.m., the radio changed again. No fade this time, no static rolling in first. 1 second I had some weak late-night country station under the hiss, and the next I was listening to a hymn that sounded older and slower than the first one. Funeral pace, heavy on the lower voices, no host, no transition. Just that same impossible sense that I had opened a door onto something already in progress. I stared at the dash for half a second, then reached over and raised the volume. Rule 3. The song filled the cab thicker than it should have. Not louder exactly, just more present, like it wasn't coming from the speakers so much as arriving around them. The acoustics were wrong again, too much room in it, too much stone and height and air, not a recording booth, not a station archive, a church maybe, but bigger than any country church had any right to sound. I drove another mile with the hymn in my ears and the wet road sliding under the beams, and that was when I started noticing the steeples. The first one I could have blamed on distance and fog. A pale shape on a ridge to the left where I was pretty sure I'd already passed the only church for miles. Then another farther ahead, narrow and dark against the sky. Then, 10 minutes later, one that looked too much like the first. Same proportions, same pointed cap, same way it sat above the trees with almost nothing else visible around it. I told myself it was fatigue. Night roads do things to distance. Fog lifts shapes and moves them around. You catch one structure from 3 different angles, and your tired brain turns it into repetition. That happens. I know it does. I've had water towers look like grain silos and school roofs look like loading docks at 2 a.m. before. You drive long enough, you stop trusting your first impression of anything set back from the road at night. But even while I was telling myself that, I was watching the ridgelines harder than I should have been. A steeple shouldn't be on both sides of the same stretch unless there are 2 churches. There weren't enough houses out there for 1 church, let alone 3. I came around a bend with a rock face on my right and a drop to the left, and there was a roadside figure standing so close to the shoulder line my body reacted before my brain did. Hands over ears, head tipped slightly forward, too close. My eyes snapped to the face before I could stop them. I didn't get much, less than a second. A flash in the wash of the headlights, and then I jerked my gaze back to the center line so hard it felt like I'd pulled something in my neck. But I got enough. The face was wrong in a way I still can't put into good language. Not torn up, not bloodied. It wasn't that kind of wrong. It was smoother than a face should be, and still somehow folded in places a face shouldn't fold, as if features had been pressed into something soft and then almost taken back out again. There might have been eyes. I can't swear to that. What I remember most clearly is the impression that the face had no business turning toward me and had done it anyway. I said, "Jesus," under my breath, and heard how thin my voice sounded in the cab. The truck stayed straight. That was the important part. I didn't drift, didn't clip the line, didn't overcorrect into the rock wall. 40,000 pounds of trailer doesn't care what you think you saw. It wants the lane held, and I held it. But the second I looked, something changed. The next bell tone came quicker than the ones before it. The hymn on the radio didn't get louder, but it felt closer. That's the best way I can say it, closer. Like the voices were no longer inside some far-off stone room, but somewhere just behind the dash. Then the static came in around the edges, not enough to cover the choir, just enough to make it sound as if both things were happening at once, and neither one was where it belonged. I started hearing bell shape and other sounds after that. In the faint ring of my coffee thermos shifting in the cup holder on a curve. In the vibration of the passenger side mirror at higher speed. in the tiny metallic tick from somewhere in the sleeper wall behind me every time the suspension settled after a dip. Not full tones, not full strikes, just little rounded edges in sounds that had been ordinary an hour earlier. That was the price of looking. The cab had stopped being a boundary. It was still the safest place I had, but it wasn't clean anymore. I picked up the phone and called Edwin again. He answered faster this time. Yeah. I looked, I told him. There was a pause so short most people wouldn't hear it. How much? Less than a second, I said. Then don't do it again, he said. That's your advice? I asked. That's what you've got? His voice didn't rise. It's enough if you follow it. The radio hymn carried under his words, low and heavy. I tightened my hand around the wheel. What does it want? That made him wait a beat longer. Then he said, recognition. I said nothing. He went on before I could ask again. Don't count it. Don't look at it. Don't answer it. What is it? I asked. Keep driving, he said, and the line went dead. Recognition. That word stayed in the cab with me after the call ended. It was worse than if he'd given me some warehouse answer about unstable cargo or old church superstition or a fragile acoustic condition inside the frame. Recognition was a human word, a word about attention, about knowing, about giving something shape just by admitting you had seen it or heard it for what it was. I put the phone down and narrowed everything back to the work. Lane position, speed, grade, distance to the next curve, mirror checks every few seconds but not too long on any one thing, engine note, brake timing, fuel range. I took inventory like I always do when the road gets bad and there's no one else coming to save you from your own panic. I checked the temp gauge, fine. Oil pressure, fine. Trailer tracking, fine. No warning lights, no pull in the wheel, no mechanical reason for any of what was happening. The truck was good, so I held on to that. A driver can survive a lot on the road if the truck still makes sense. You keep the machine inside the world, you know, and sometimes your own mind follows it back there. For a while, that worked. I eased through another series of downhill curves, engine braking where I needed it, riding the line clean, keeping the trailer from pushing too hard into the tractor on the wet pavement. I passed one dark gas station with a busted soda machine outside and no cars in the lot, past a mailbox cluster at the mouth of a gravel road and two houses set way back behind bare trees. Past another steeple I refused to study long enough to decide whether it was the same one or not. Then the bell rang again. I didn't count it, at least not on purpose. The tone lasted a touch longer than before, and buried inside it, under the metal and resonance in the hollow body of the sound itself, there was something else. Not a word. Not even enough to swear it was a human voice, just a shape inside the sound that leaned toward speech the way a shadow can lean toward a person before you know what cast it. A softened edge. A little rise and fall that didn't belong to metal. I looked straight ahead and listened harder than I wanted to. The next time it rang, that shape was there again. Still not a word. Still not clear, but changed. And once I knew it was changing, I couldn't unknow it. Dr. Weller called while I was coming down a wet grade with a guardrail on one side and nothing on the other but black drop and trees. I let it ring once before I hit the hands-free button. My eyes stayed on the road. John, he said. Yeah, I said. His voice had that same hospital steadiness as before, but flatter now. Your father had a rough hour. I tightened my grip on the wheel and watched the center line come at me through the shine of the headlights. Is he still there? I asked. That was the only question that mattered. Yes, he said. He's still here. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. He's had some pressure changes, Dr. Weller said. We've got him stabilized again for the moment, but I need you to understand he's still not secure. The truck came through the bottom of the grade, and I eased onto the throttle again. What changed? His numbers dipped. They recovered. That's the good part. He took a second. The bad part is this can still swing. We're not past that. I looked at the dash clock. 12:19 a.m. Call me if anything changes, I said. We will, he told me. I ended the call and set the phone back down. The cab felt smaller after that. Not physically smaller, just tighter. Like there was less room left in it for anything that wasn't the road, the truck, and the thought of my father lying under hospital light with machines making sure he stayed where he was. Franklin would have hated that room, hated the helplessness of it, hated people discussing him in careful voices while he was too drugged up or too hurt to tell them to cut it out, hated me imagining any of it while I was 100 miles away with both hands on a wheel instead of sitting in the chair beside his bed where I should have been. The bell rang before I'd finished that thought. Same rounded tone, same metal body to the sound. Then, inside it, not under it anymore, but inside it, a voice said, "Check your left tire." I froze so hard my shoulders locked. It was Franklin's voice, not a perfect imitation in the way bad recordings imitate somebody. It was him the way I heard him in memory without trying. Dry, slight roughness in the throat, the words landing clipped and practical, like he wasn't making conversation so much as pointing out something obvious I should have already handled. My mouth opened before I even knew I was about to answer. I caught myself with my tongue against the back of my teeth and shut my jaw so hard it clicked. Rule 5. If the bell rings in a voice you recognize, do not answer it, and do not say that person's name out loud. I stared through the windshield and felt my heart beat in my neck. Every instinct I had said, answer. Not because I believed my father was back there in the trailer, not because I'd lost my mind all at once, just because a familiar voice in a closed space pulls a response out of you before judgment gets there. Somebody says something that sounds like your father, you answer. That's all. I swallowed and kept both hands on the wheel. The road bent left through another stand of trees, then opened onto a cut where the hillside had been shaved back years ago and never properly cleaned up. Broken rock, rain-black dirt, fence posts leaning at bad angles. I kept the truck in lane and listened to my own breathing until it started sounding normal again. Then memory came in the way it always does when you're tired and trying not to think about the thing that matters most. Not a big scene, not a speech. Just my father opening the fridge at my apartment years ago and standing there too long because he'd noticed there was nothing in it but mustard, beer, and half a bag of shredded cheese. He hadn't said a word that night. Next afternoon, I'd gotten home from a run and found cold fried chicken in foil on the middle shelf and a gallon of milk I hadn't asked for. Another one after that. Me under the hood of an old pickup when I was 23, trying to do a thermostat swap and doing it wrong. Franklin standing there long enough to tell me I was doing it wrong, then walking off, then coming back 10 minutes later with the right socket and acting like he'd only returned because I was about to damage something expensive. Another one. Him on the phone 2 years before, refusing to let me hire anybody to fix the back steps at his place after they'd started sagging. "I'm not paying a man for a board and 6 screws," he'd said. Then he'd fallen off those same steps a month later carrying feed because he still thought 72 felt like 50. That was him. That was us. Nothing soft enough to call tender if you were standing outside it, but all of it counted. The bell rang again. This time Franklin's voice said, "You still driving tired?" I felt that one deeper than I wanted to. He used to say that whenever he called late and I picked up after too many miles without enough sleep. Not because he wanted a long talk, just because he knew the sound my voice got when I'd been on caffeine and bad gas station food too long and was pretending I was fine. My hand twitched toward the radio before I stopped it. I don't know why. Maybe because people reach for other noise when one kind of noise gets too close. I kept my eyes on the road and said nothing. The truck rolled through another shallow curve. No traffic, no porch lights, no roadside figure this time. Just my own headlights and the shine of wet paint and that sense I'd had for the last hour that the route was ahead of me in more ways than one. The bell waited longer that time, long enough to let me hope it had spent whatever it was spending. Then it rang again. "You eating or just driving?" That was almost enough to break me, because it was so ordinary, so exactly him, not some grand final message, not a dead man's warning. Just the kind of irritated practical question he'd ask if I called him from a truck stop, and he heard from my voice alone that I'd been living on coffee and garbage for too long. I let out a short breath through my nose, and it came out wrong. I still didn't answer. But after that, I understood something I hadn't understood before. This wasn't random. It wasn't just choosing a voice out of my life because it could. It knew what kind of voice would get through. Not the dramatic version of my father, not some dying bed version asking forgiveness or offering it. Franklin, at his most normal. Franklin in the register my body knew how to answer before my mind got a vote. The cruelest part of it was how small the lines were. No ghost story speech, no threat, no bargain, just the exact shape of the man I had spent my whole life hearing from across garages and kitchens and truck beds and half-finished phone calls. The next time it rang, it only said my name. John. That was the voice he used when something actually mattered, not angry, not loud, just level enough that you knew not to miss it. Every muscle in my throat tightened. I almost said, "Yeah, I got that close enough that I felt the word gather in my mouth and stop behind my teeth." I kept driving. The road was still wet. The truck still held the lane. The gauges still read fine. My father was still alive in a hospital bed somewhere behind me in the dark, and the thing in the trailer had found the shortest path between those facts and my own mouth. That was when I understood what it was really doing. It wasn't trying to scare me. Fear would have been easier. It was trying to make me answer. And now it knew exactly which voice to use. I called Edwin before I had time to cool off. The road had straightened for a short stretch, which in those mountains counted as a gift. Wet pavement, double yellow, tree line tight on both sides. No traffic ahead, no headlights behind me. Just enough room to keep the truck steady while I got the answer he'd been avoiding all night. He picked up on the first ring. "Yeah," he said. "The bell's using my father's voice," I told him. He didn't say he was surprised. He didn't ask if I was sure. He didn't say I must have heard wrong. That mattered. I kept my eyes on the lane and said, "You knew it could do that." "It was possible," he said. That wasn't a denial. I drove a few more seconds with the wipers dragging slow across the glass. "You picked me because of Franklin." Silence. Then he said, "You were a workable fit." That landed harder than if he'd tried to lie. I looked at the clock. 12:31 a.m. "Then tell me what this thing does." He took a second before answering. "It responds to recognition." I said nothing. "It gets stronger when it's answered," he said, "when it's counted, when it's named." The bell rang once from inside the trailer while he was still on the line. I felt the sound more than heard it. "The rules are there to interrupt that," he said. "Interrupt what?" I asked. "A connection." That was all he gave me. That was the kind of answer a company man gives when he thinks the truth belongs to his side of the table. Procedure without meaning. Behavior without explanation. But even that was enough to change the shape of the night. The bell wasn't just making noise. It was trying to finish something. I said, "What happens if I answer it?" His voice stayed flat. "Then the route changes." I wanted to ask him what that meant, but I already knew I wouldn't get the real version. "What does it want?" This time he answered fast. "It needs an answer," he said. Then he hung up. I drove with the phone in my hand for another 10 seconds before I set it back down. Recognition. Counted. Named. Answered. Connection. He had given me the mechanics without the meaning. That was stonemark all over. Enough truth to keep the load moving, not enough to let the driver understand what he'd agreed to carry. I needed the part Edwin wouldn't say out loud. So I called St. Brigid's. The number rang long enough that I almost figured the church office was dead after midnight. Then I heard the click of a receiver, and Father Gideon March answered in the same tired voice I'd heard in the doorway. "This is Gideon March." "It's John Vann," I said. "I'm on the road." He took a second. "Then you're hearing it now." "Yes," I said. "It's using my father's voice." Another pause. Not surprise, not fear. Just a man hearing something confirmed that he'd probably been dreading all evening. "Has it used his name?" he asked. "No." "Has it used yours?" "Yes." The truck came through a long bend and I kept it centered between the lines. "Edwin says it responds to recognition. He says the rules interrupt a connection. I need the part he won't give me." Father Gideon was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped a little. "We stopped ringing that bell years ago," he said. "Too many deaths around the church. Then people began hearing it when it hadn't rung at all." I said nothing. "It started returning voices," he said. "Not cleanly, but enough." The road dipped and rose again. The engine note changed with it. "Small things," he said. "Ordinary things. That's why people answered." That was answer enough, because that was exactly what had gotten to me. Not some grand warning, not some dead man's speech, just Franklin sounding like Franklin. "Check your left tire. You still driving tired? You eating or just driving?" I reached into my jacket and pulled out the laminated card. I laid it on the dash where I could see it under the instrument light. The rules looked different now. Do not let the trailer come to a full stop within sight of any church steeple. Not because steeples were bad luck, because they gave the bell another frame to belong in, another place built to hold sound, grief, prayer, and names. If you hear a bell ring from inside the trailer before midnight, keep driving. If you hear it after midnight, do not count the rings. Before midnight, it was only a sound. After midnight, it wanted rhythm. Count it, and you were helping it take shape. Keep the radio on at all times. If the radio turns to choir music, raise the volume and do not change the station until the song ends. Because silence gave it room. The choir didn't stop it. It crowded it, blunted the empty space enough to keep the rest from getting too close too fast. If you see anyone standing on the shoulder with both hands over their ears, do not look at their face. Because they weren't just people on the roadside anymore. They belonged to the hearing somehow. If the bell rings in a voice you recognize, do not answer it and do not say that person's name out loud. Because names finish things. I heard my own voice before I meant to. "What are the people on the shoulder?" Father Gideon answered carefully. "Some heard it too long. Some answered too late. Some are only what's left of refusing after the wrong part of them had already agreed." That was not a clean explanation, but it was enough for the road I was on. I looked at the dark ahead and said, "What does it actually want?" He took a breath. "It does not hunt people," he told me. "It hunts reply." The bell rang again behind me. I didn't count it. "Reply to what?" I asked. "To love, to guilt, to obligation." He let that sit there. To whatever a man still can't leave unsaid. I felt that line go through me and stay there. The windshield caught a brief wash of mist and then cleared again. Black trees, wet lane, nothing else. "If you give it the name," Father Gideon said, "it will ring as that name from then on." I didn't answer right away, because that was the shape of the whole thing at last. Not a cursed object in the simple storybook sense. Not a thing trying to jump out of the trailer and drag me off the road. Something worse than that. Something patient enough to use what was already inside me. I had spent most of my life with Franklin Vann in that narrow country between care and conversation. We were not the kind of father and son who sat on porches and said the right things before dark. We fixed what needed fixing. We argued when the numbers got bad. We left food, tools, and advice where the other man would find them. We let too much go unsaid because that was easier than saying it wrong. That left room. Enough room for a voice in the dark to sound like him and know exactly where to land. Edwin hadn't picked me just because I could handle a mountain route in bad weather. He had picked me because I was the right kind of son, loyal enough to keep driving, afraid enough to be vulnerable, stubborn enough not to walk away after the first wrong thing happened, and unfinished enough with my father that a few ordinary words in his voice could still pull an answer halfway out of my mouth. I checked the clock again. 12:39 a.m. Mercy Ridge was still somewhere ahead in the hills. None of that mattered if I broke before I got there. That was the part Edwin hadn't needed to explain. The final test was not the road, not the grades, not the truck, not the weight in the trailer. It was whether I could hear my father call my name and keep driving anyway. The road to Mercy Ridge looked less like a public route and more like something laid down for a single purpose and then half hidden. Once I got closer to Bluefield and onto the final stretch, the pavement improved in a way the rest of the night hadn't. The lane lines were fresh. The shoulders were trimmed back. Chain-link fence appeared in stretches along the road, then vanished, then returned farther up. No signs, no houses, no porch lights, just road, flood-dark woods, and the feeling that I was being funneled somewhere, built to keep things in more than let them in. The bell kept sounding behind me. I wouldn't count. I couldn't let myself. Every time it rang, some part of my brain reached for a number before I cut it off. The effort of that was starting to wear me down more than the road itself. My eyes burned, my jaw hurt, my shoulders had gone tight hours ago and stayed there. Then the radio changed one last time. No static first, no drift. 1 second there was a weak country station under the hiss, and the next there was another hymn, slower than the others, low and heavy enough to feel like it belonged in a funeral procession. I reached over and turned it up because the rule said to, and because by then I was too far inside the night to start getting proud about following stupid instructions. The choir filled the cab. At the edges of the headlights I started seeing the shoulder figures again, more of them this time. One by a fence post with both hands over its ears, another farther up at the tree line, too still to be a person waiting on a ride, then a third on the opposite shoulder where there wasn't enough room to stand without dropping into the ditch. I kept my eyes on the center line and the mirrors and refused to look long enough to tell whether they were the same ones repeating or different ones waiting. Up ahead, just beyond another bend, I saw the shape of a small chapel-like structure or roadside shrine lifted above the trees. At the same time, the road pinched down near an open security gate with one lane partially blocked by a dark service truck angled wrong against the curb. I came off the throttle and worked the truck carefully, keeping it moving without letting it stop dead. That was the job at its simplest right there. Weight, distance, brake pressure, timing. The trailer wanted simpler instructions than I could give it. Stop or go, brake or release. It never likes that half crawl, and neither do I. But I kept the rig rolling, slow enough to stay safe, fast enough not to let it settle fully under the line of that steeple shape. The bell rang again. Then it stopped sounding like metal at all. "You still got that wrench set?" Franklin's voice, small, ordinary, exact. The old Craftsman case he'd left in my truck years ago after watching me strip a bolt with cheap tools and pretend I had it handled. No speech, no lesson. Just the case in the passenger seat and him acting like it had always belonged there. I felt my throat move around an answer before I stopped it. The truck rolled another 10 yards. The gate lane opened a little more, then the voice came again. "Don't leave the truck idling." That one hurt worse because it was so normal. The kind of thing he would say, walking past me in a yard or driveway, not because he was trying to have a moment, but because wasted fuel annoyed him more than most people. My right hand slipped once on the wheel. I reset my grip and kept the truck centered. Then the voice said my name. John. Not loud, not angry, just level enough to carry the real man in it. I almost answered. I got close enough to feel the word gather in my mouth. Yeah, just that. One syllable, automatic. The kind of answer a son gives before he has decided anything at all. Then came the last line. You still there? That was the one that nearly broke me, because it sounded exactly like a father checking from the other room, or across a garage, or from the porch after a silence that had gone on a little too long. Not dramatic, not ghostly, just familiar enough to make responding feel like the most natural thing in the world. I gripped the wheel until my forearms hurt and said nothing. I didn't pray, I didn't shout back at it, I didn't open the trailer, I just drove. The truck crossed the gate and rolled fully onto Mercy Ridge property, and the pressure changed all at once, not like a win, not relief, more like a valve opening somewhere far away and bleeding something off. The choir on the radio cut out, the roadside figures were gone, the next bell tone never came. What was left was pavement, floodlights, fencing, and buildings. Mercy Ridge. Preservation Annex was bigger than I expected and colder in a practical way. Low concrete buildings, windowless sections, receiving bays, security lights washing everything flat and gray. Nothing about it said church archive in the normal sense. It looked like a place built to hold things nobody wanted to describe in plain language. Edwin Graves was waiting near the receiving lane in the same dark jacket he'd worn at St. Brigid's. He stepped up when I climbed down from the cab. You made it. Barely, I said. He looked at the trailer. Barely is enough. That was answer enough. Workers in dark coveralls moved into position around the trailer without wasting a second. No one looked curious. No one looked surprised. They treated the load like something active that needed to be transferred quickly and quietly. I looked at Edwin. My father. He checked his phone once. Still alive. Cold answer. Useful answer. He handed me a printed receipt in an envelope. Payment cleared. I took both and left without opening them. I drove straight to the hospital with dawn just beginning to thin the sky. Franklin had made it through the worst of that immediate swing. He looked smaller in the bed than I wanted him to, but he was still there. When he woke enough to focus on me, he looked over and said, You look tired. Yeah, I said. He turned his head toward the window a little. Truck still running. No, I said. I shut it off. That was all. He got better slowly after that. Better enough for rehab, better enough to complain, better enough to act like everyone else was making too much of the whole thing. I never went back to Stonemark. They never called me again. But I didn't go back to normal either. I can't drive at night in silence now. I leave the radio on, even when there's nothing worth hearing. If I'm tired enough, some sounds still carry a rounded bell edge under them, a thermos settling in the cup holder, a mirror buzzing in crosswind. That's usually enough. Months later, I drove Franklin home from an appointment in my pickup. We passed a small church on a hillside with a dark steeple and an empty lot. He looked out the passenger window and asked, You hear that? I didn't answer, because I did hear it. 4 slow bell strikes from somewhere just behind the back seat in a truck carrying nothing but the 2 of us and a paper bag of prescriptions. I kept my eyes on the road and drove.